The narrative begins in legendary Sparta. In an era when pro-Persian sentiment permeated the Greek world, Sparta stood as a bastion of unwavering resolve. Many of Hellas' city-states, including prosperous Ionian cities and numerous colonies, engaged in lively trade with the Persian Empire, ensuring their economic prosperity. It was not uncommon for Hellenes to serve in the Persian army, acknowledging the grandeur and might of the King of Kings. These close ties with the Achaemenid Empire fostered a desire for cooperation, or at the very least, neutrality. Sparta, however, adopted a fundamentally different stance. The Spartans' attitude towards Persia was invariably hostile, akin to declaring, "Persia is not for us." This rejection of Persian influence became a defining characteristic of the Spartan spirit. To understand the reasons behind this unique opposition, one must become more intimately acquainted with the Spartans themselves, their way of life, principles, and unyielding will. It is within their very essence that the key to unlocking this historical enigma lies, and this acquaintance will be the next stage in our exploration. Among all ancient Greek city-states, Sparta stood out for its totalitarian nature, despite incorporating elements of democracy into its political system. Governance was exercised by a popular assembly, a council of elders, and 2 kings. Of particular interest was the system of ephors, officials who were permitted to remain conspicuously seated in the presence of either or both kings, underscoring their exceptional status as guardians of laws and traditions. For the Spartans, these unwritten rules held the highest value, as they ensured the preservation of their way of life. Who, then, were the Spartans? They were Dorians, who founded their polis in the fertile Laconian valley, ideally suited for agriculture. Upon arriving in these lands, the Dorians settled the valley, forming several communities. Subsequently, 2 of the most powerful tribes subjugated the others, establishing their dominance. Thus, the settlement of Sparta emerged, eventually growing into a major city-state. Its geographical location provided Sparta with relative isolation from the rest of the Peloponnese, thanks to its mountain ranges. However, there were convenient passes that allowed enemies to be met, 1 pass and 2 northern approaches leading directly to Sparta. Between the mountainous plateau of Kalines and the Cataphia Ridge, 2 V-shaped valleys converged towards the city itself. It is likely that the Spartan system of dual kingship originated from these 2 dominant tribes. Perhaps at some point, they decided that the pursuit of absolute power by a single ruler was impractical, preferring a system with 2 kings, supplemented by oligarchic control over their authority. This unique system proved highly effective. Ancient Greece, as is well known, was a state where slavery played a significant role. Although the number of slaves was not excessively large, their labor ensured the accustomed way of life for the Greeks. For instance, in a typical polis, mornings were dedicated to work, while the afternoons were reserved for public activities such as training in gymnasia and philosophical discussions at symposia. Sparta, however, took a different path. It was decided that the local population, subjugated by the Dorians, would undertake labor, while the Spartans, as noble warriors, would dedicate themselves exclusively to military matters. Their primary goal was preparation for war. This is why Sparta featured the most pronounced social hierarchy among all Greek city-states. The Spartiates formed the elite of society, possessing full citizen rights and serving as the backbone of the Spartan phalanx. Their lives were entirely dedicated to military art, ensuring they remained invincible warriors always ready for any conflict with the Helots. The Helots were in a position close to slavery. However, in Sparta, there was no private ownership of slaves. This could be characterized as communist or socialist slavery, as all slaves belonged to the community. These communal Helot slaves were obliged to labor for the benefit of the valiant Spartan warriors. But what did the Spartans themselves do? They were engaged in producing new Spartans. Sparta had a unique system of upbringing. Spartan men generally lived in barracks, while women remained in their homes. Men were not permitted to live permanently at home. They spent most of their lives within the tight-knit male community of the barracks. They rarely appeared at home. If a Spartan wished to see his wife, he had to slip away secretly to produce a new Spartan. This was attributed to the Spartan belief that a man who had lived apart from his wife for a long time would miss her so intensely that their reunion would be filled with passion, and the stronger the passion, the higher the probability of conceiving a strong and valiant Spartan boy. A similar situation was observed with women. Spartan women actively participated in sports and possessed significantly greater rights than women in most other city-states. They bore great responsibility and were mistresses of their homes, though calling their dwellings estates would be an exaggeration, as Spartans led a highly ascetic lifestyle. Women had the right to engage in sports, and a statue of a Spartan woman who won competitions has even been preserved. For Spartans, this was commonplace, while other Greeks, observing them, would exclaim, "How can they live like that? It's a true nightmare." However, despite seemingly attractive aspects such as pluralism or the prominent role of women, the reality was quite different. It is important to understand that this entire system was designed to create a rigid, conservative society, completely focused on oppressing those around them. This applied to both the Helots and the Perioeci, Sparta's disenfranchised citizens. The Perioeci, nonetheless, fought in the phalanx on par with the Spartiates. They lived around Sparta, engaging in agriculture, crafts, and other occupations. There were quite a few of them in Sparta. Their phalanxes were usually positioned on the left flank, as the right flank was considered the most important and vulnerable. A warrior's right hand held a spear or a Greek sword, machaira, while the left held a shield. During the advance of the phalanx, the left flank was fully protected by the shields of the subsequent ranks. To the right, everything was exposed, so mounted archers and javelin throwers, attacking from the right, could inflict serious damage. All phalanx engagements aimed to outflank the enemy, envelop their army with their left flank, that is, to breach their right flank, disrupt their formation, and lead to their defeat. In the 7th century BC, the Spartans, renowned for their martial prowess, established dominance over neighboring tribes, ruthlessly suppressing any resistance and subjecting them to their will. Numerous sources attest to the cruel treatment meted out by the Spartans to the subjugated population, which originally did not belong to the Dorian community. The hatred for Spartans among the local populace was so intense that one Helot, living near Sparta, expressed a willingness to commit an act of cannibalism against Spartans, making no distinction between men and women. Special attention was paid to the upbringing of the younger generation of Spartans. The agoge system was a harsh school of survival, where boys were deliberately subjected to hunger and taught to steal. Punishment only followed if caught, and the ability to avoid punishment was considered a sign of ingenuity. A legend tells of a youth who, having caught a fox cub, hid it beneath his clothing. When Spartiates encountered him, they inquired what he was carrying. Concealing his prize, the youth did not confess, even as the fox cub began to gnaw at his insides. He preferred a torturous death to shame. For Spartans, public opinion was of paramount importance, and shame was considered the worst of social phenomena. The fear of condemnation from fellow citizens, of displaying weakness, or of humiliation before an enemy was a tremendous incentive for maintaining an impeccable reputation. A Spartan's preparation for adulthood was geared towards developing cruelty, decisiveness, and fearlessness in taking the lives of others. Helots were often intoxicated, displayed in an unsightly manner, and dressed in animal skins to emphasize their barbarity in contrast to the civilized Spartans. During symposia, analogous to banquets, Spartan youths observed the humiliation of Helots, which was intended to reinforce their sense of superiority. Not infrequently, such evenings concluded with the killing of a Helot, which was not considered a crime. In Sparta, killing a Helot was permissible, whereas an attack on a citizen of another polis could lead to serious consequences. However, if a Spartan could justify the killing of a Helot, e.g., insult or attempt to cause shame, it was regarded as a just summary execution. Unsurprisingly, the Helots harbored no warm feelings towards their Spartan oppressors. The Spartan diet included the famous black broth, the mere sight of which horrified other Greeks. Spartans, conversely, consumed this dish with pride, demonstrating their strength, endurance, and martial prowess, capable of enduring even such fare. According to some accounts, the broth was prepared not only from the blood of domestic animals but also from wild boars hunted in the forest, much like heroes of ancient Greek myths. Spartans would bring the carcasses home and ravenously consume the broth throughout the evening, washing it down with wine and other beverages. This was considered a display of supreme masculinity and served as a powerful propaganda tool, influencing other city-states. The influence and renown of the Persian army made it an extremely dangerous adversary for any Greek polis. Sparta, however, stood out for its irreconcilable hostility towards the Persians. Even when Athens attempted to convince the Spartans that common ground could be found with the Persians, and when all of Greece traded with them, few understood the true nature of Persia. Only after the brutal suppression of the Ionian revolt did the Greeks realize their mistake and acknowledge Persia as an enemy. And although some cities were subsequently forced to support the Persians, deeming victory impossible, most sources recount 27 to 28 polis that believed in their victory until the end and ultimately achieved it.